What made me guilty? For not raising my hands fast enough? Not lying down? No, my crime was just being black. Jerome Williams, 37 years old, tall, in a suit, had just gotten off work. He decided to go for a walk to clear his mind, something he had done countless times before. But this time he didn't realize it. This street wasn't for him, but the question was why it wasn't for him. The cool evening breeze hit his face as he passed through an upscale, predominantly white neighborhood. He took a deep breath, trying to shake off the day's fatigue. But behind a window, a pair of suspicious eyes were locked on him. Suddenly, a man and a woman locked eyes. An old white woman peered through the curtains, narrowing her gaze with distrust. Without hesitation, he reached for his phone. 911, what is your emergency? There's someone here, a black man. I can't see his face clearly, but he's walking around the neighborhood. I don't recognize him. He might be up to something. I'm so scared of him. Please come here as soon as possible. The call ended, and the sirens began to wail. Jerome noticed red and blue lights approaching, flashing in the distance. His eyebrows furrowed in surprise. A few seconds later, a patrol car squeaked to a stop beside him. Raise your hands or I'll shoot you. Jerome's heartbeat quickened. Two white police officers, Parker and Reed, had drawn their guns and were pointing them directly at him. He slowly raised his hands, still dazed. Is there a problem, officer? I was just walking. No answer. Reed moved quickly, grabbed Jerome's arms and pushed him against the nearest wall. What are you doing in this neighborhood? Tell me quickly what you're doing here, or it won't be good for you. Jerome hesitated, his mind gone. I was just walking, but they weren't listening. Reed pulled out a pair of handcuffs and put them forcefully on Jerome's wrists. The neighbors called in a tip. I want to do something to the people in these houses. Are you a murderer or a thief? Jerome's breathing became erratic. Windows? Was he looking in? No, he hadn't. He hadn't done anything. He had just been walking. But now his face was pressed against the cold hood of a police car. It was cold in the holding cell. The damp air from the concrete walls sent chills down Jerome's spine. Hours had passed. No one had explained why he was there. The door creaked open. Officer Parker walked in with a file. He sat across from Jerome and grinned. What were you doing in that neighborhood? It would be easier for you if you told the truth, or I'd make up 1,000 reasons to keep you here. Jerome swallowed hard. I was walking. Parker rolled his eyes and chuckled. Just walking, huh? He opened the file and turned the pages. One of the neighbors claims you peeked in their window. Jerome clenched his jaw and shook his head in disbelief. That's ridiculous. I didn't do anything like that. Parker grinned. Maybe you were just walking in the wrong neighborhood, Jerome. That neighborhood is no place for the likes of you. Jerome's teeth ground together. What exactly am I being charged with? I want my lawyer. Parker leaned back in his chair and laughed. And what are you going to tell your lawyer? There's no crime here, is there? But still, everyone was afraid of you, Jerome. What were you really doing in there? Jerome's breathing became shallow. He knew this game. They wanted him to panic, to make a mistake. But Jerome remained silent, internally struggling with himself as much as possible. Parker closed the file, stood up and walked to the door. We'll see what happens in court, Mr. Williams, and I expect and enjoy bad days for you. Jerome was spending his third day in solitary confinement. Time had lost its meaning. He had not yet been formally charged, but he was already being treated like a criminal. When the door finally opened, it wasn't a police officer who walked in. It was Rachel Coleman. Short-haired, sharp-eyed, and known for winning countless cases against racial injustice, she was one of the city's most notorious lawyers. She placed a file on the table and met Jerome's gaze. I know your story, Jerome, but if you want to get out of here, we're going to have to fight, and we're going to have to fight hard. The mentality of the people we're up against is worse than that of a monster. For the first time in days, a glimmer of hope appeared on Jerome's face. Isn't telling the truth enough? Rachel gave a bitter laugh and shook her head. If telling the truth was enough, you wouldn't be sitting in this cell. We're going to need more. Jerome took a deep breath. So what do we do? Rachel opened the file. The neighbors who called the police claimed you were peeking in the windows, walking around suspiciously. But we both know that's a lie. Now all we have to do is prove it. Jerome's jaw tightened. Do we have any proof? Rachel grinned. Not yet, but we'll find it. She immediately got to work and began searching the neighborhood for surveillance footage. But there was a problem. The video footage from that night had already been reviewed by the police and was now missing, or the cops had erased the evidence. But someone had seen everything. A neighbor. Rachel knocked on the door of an old man who lived a few houses away from the house that had reported Jerome. The man had watched the whole thing and, disturbed by the behavior of the police, had secretly recorded everything on his phone. When they played the video, the truth was undeniable. Jerome was just walking. The police car suddenly stopped and the officers put him on the ground. There was no threat. There was no crime. Rachel gripped the phone tightly. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, human rights activists, and Jerome's family all sat in tense anticipation, waiting for justice to be served. The prosecutor stepped forward, presenting Jerome as a dangerous suspect. The residents of the neighborhood felt threatened by his presence, the prosecutor argued. The officers acted to ensure the safety of the community. Jerome clenched his jaw. He had committed no crime, but the system had already decided he was guilty. Rachel tapped her fingers against the table before standing. "Your Honor, my client was falsely accused, and we have the evidence to prove it." The courtroom fell silent. The judge raised an eyebrow. "You may present the evidence." The screen lit up with the video footage. Video evidence. Jerome was simply walking. The police car suddenly stopped, and the officers tackled him without cause. No one in the neighborhood was in danger. A murmur spread through the courtroom. The prosecutor remained silent, but Rachel wasn't finished. She pulled out a document. "Your Honor, on the same night, internal police messages referred to Jerome as a suspicious black man. No prior criminal record. No justified reason for arrest. He was targeted solely based on the color of his skin." The courtroom went cold. The judge flipped through the files, his expression darkening. "This is not a mistake. This is deliberate bias." The prosecutor had no words. The officers in the courtroom avoided eye contact. The courtroom was silent. Every eye was on the judge as he closed the case files and looked up. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone was waiting for the final decision. Jerome sat tall, his hands clasped together on his lap, his breath steady. His life had been turned upside down simply for walking, but he refused to disappear in the face of injustice. The judge lifted his gavel and struck it down. "This court finds that all charges against Jerome Williams are baseless. Furthermore, the Metropolitan Police Department is found guilty of wrongful arrest." For a moment, there was silence. Then, a wave of applause erupted. People stood up, cheering. A small smile of relief crept onto Jerome's face. But it wasn't over yet. Rachel stood up, holding one final document in her hand. "Your Honor, this is not just about Jerome. This case is proof of a systematic issue. Officers acted on false reports without proper cause. Therefore, I formally request an investigation into the officers involved and those who made the false reports." The judge gave a firm nod. The neighborhood residents who filed the false report were held accountable. An internal investigation was launched against the officers involved. Jerome's case sparked a new legislative proposal against racial profiling and wrongful arrests. As the bailiff removed the cuffs from Jerome's wrists, he took a deep breath. He was free. But his days in that holding cell had taught him a powerful lesson. Justice wasn't given. It had to be fought for. The moment Jerome stepped outside, journalists swarmed him. Microphones were thrust in his face. "Mr. Williams, today justice was served. Do you have anything to say?" Jerome paused. Then, locking eyes with the cameras, he spoke. "One day, walking won't be a crime. But until that day comes, we keep fighting."